This story is seen in Celtic myth and lore. The Irish have their own version, and the Scots do as well. In fact, they say that there's a family on the island of North Uist in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland that have Selkie roots. And I've even heard stories of Selkies off the west coast of California, but you never know. So this is a story about a man named Donald. And Donald was the one, he was the one who didn't leave the house. All his siblings, a whole mighty pack of them, went to the four directions to seek their fortune and make their way in the world. But Donald was the one, and there's always one, who stays back to usher his parents out of this life and into the next. And so Donald was that. And at the end of his parents' lives, he was left alone with the croft, with the cottage, with the boat, and the cabbages, and the spuds. He had no social skills. He was lonely. He had always known his own mam's voice every day of his life. Well, years passed, and Donald got on all right. He made his way. He kept to himself. Where he felt most at home was on the sea, with that magnificent, silver, long, shining water beneath him. And the sea had been good to him, offering up the silver of herring, the substance of salmon. But he was lonely. And if you looked at him long enough, you might even see a little crease through his cheek that a river of tears had flown. Had not flown. Sorry, stop. Can I just pick it up, or do I have to start over? Oh, that's magic. Yeah. Is that it? Stay. Okay, where was I?
The river of tears.
Yes. But if you'd look close enough at Donald's face, you would have seen the soft crease of tears that had made their way down his face, a river of tears. He cried in his sleep. Tears of longing, of sorrow. Well, this one night, the longest day of the year, and now it was coming on night, because at midsummer, the night is light until it's not. And Donald was out in his boat. Now it was late, almost midnight, and still the sun was there, this old friend, a lobe, right on the horizon. And that's when he heard it, the song. And he looked to the left and he looked to the right. What? A song? He was far from shore. How could he hear a song? But he did. Oh, and it was sweet. Well, his curiosity was piqued. He'd been hooked. And so he rowed the boat in the direction of the song. And he could see how it carried on the wind, weaving back and forth and all around. But he had the keen listening of a fisherman who knows the wind and knows the sea and knows the language of the stars. And he could tell he was getting closer, but he still had no idea where the song was coming from. And now the sun had truly vanished into the sea, as it did every day. And it was that soft light, the gloaming, the time when the fairies came, the time of magic, the time of the numinous. And the music felt sweeter and stronger. And he paddled and he watched and he listened. And then he saw a familiar landmark, a pile of rocks really, but an island, a skerry. And he watched it. Gosh, the music seemed to be coming from there, but there's no one living on that. It's uninhabitable. And as he watched, on cue, he saw an arm raise up, silhouetted on the soft blue of the slowly fading light. And another arm rise up. And then he saw a body, and he made out 3 women dancing and moving their bodies as they sang up into the night, their feet moving over the jagged stones as if they had been doing this all their lives. His first thought was, these were not village lasses. That, and they had no clothes on. He'd never seen a woman unclothed, except for his own mother's body as he washed it when all the breath had gone. So he was transfixed. He was enchanted. Who could these women be? And then rising up from some deep, long past memory, Selkie's. Oh, sure, didn't he sit on his granny's lap and she told him stories about the seal people and how they would come out 1 or 2 times a year and take off their Selkie skins to be humans. Quite something to be a human, you know. But Selkies were a thing for children, surely. But who were these women? And then he noticed a pile of what looked like pelts, skins. Could these be Selkies? And he remembered his granny saying if you were to take a Selkie skin, that she or he would be bound to you. Now, he wasn't so much into taking something that didn't belong to him. Donald had a strong sense of fairness. He was going to think, unlike most of my brothers. But the longing in him was deep and wide. And oh, wouldn't one of these lovely, beautiful women make the perfect bride? And so quietly he pulled the boat up against the shore. And he clambered up the rocks and he snatched one of the pelts and he tucked it in the boat. And he waited. But the music wasn't as sweet now. And then once darkness had truly come like a great curtain covering the night, except for the shine of the stars and the reflection in the sea. He watched as the women, the Selkies, move towards their pelts, and one by one pull them up around their bodies and then dive in to the waves which welcomed them. All but one went in, and she stood looking side to side and around. No pelt. And that's when Donald reached down and grabbed it, and he stood up in the boat, as only a fisherman knows how to do. And he held up the pelt, and he held out his hand. And the woman, the Selkie woman, looked at him, startled to be seen. Not because she had no clothes on, it didn't occur, but because she saw what was in his hand, and she knew. But she looked into his face, and she read the lines there. She saw the language in his eyes, the loneliness. She felt it rolling off him. So she spoke, and she said, "I will go. I will go with you for 7 years. And then the next day you will return my skin, and I will return to the sea." Well, Donald was ashamed and curious, and yes. And so she moved over the rocks, and he helped her into the boat, and he covered her with the blanket woven by his own grandmother, and he rowed to shore with her in silence, except for the waves and the song of the stars on the sea. That night they were wed. She was given the name Mari. Mara means sea in Gaelic. And they had a good life. They learned to love one another. You can learn to love. But you know, she still went down to the shore often and gazed out at the great expanse, knowing what lay beneath, and longing for that home. And soon there were babies and more babies. And before you knew it, 7 years had passed. And her life was good. She wasn't unhappy. But she knew what she would do on that day. And here it was. So that night she said, "Donald, you know, my love, it's been 7 years since I came with you. And you remember, you're part of the deal. You're part of the bargain." Well, Donald knew fine what night it was. He knew fine it had been 7 years, and he didn't want to talk about it. How could she consider leaving him and their children? What kind of mother was she? Those had been his last words before he stomped out of the house, slamming the door. Now the children had been asleep, except for the youngest, wee Cathal. Cathal had heard his parents, not understood, but had heard their voices, and he more felt his father's anger and his mother's sadness as children do, as many of us who are not children do. And he was about to go out to sit with his mother when he heard his voice, this voice, and his name being called. Cathal, Cathal. And he went to the window which looked out over the bay. And there in the moonlight, a path of light on the sea, he saw a bull seal. Ach, these seals were like squirrels here. They were everywhere. But this one was speaking to him. This had never happened before. He gave himself a good pinch to make sure he wasn't dreaming. And no, it hurt. He was awake. And he climbed out the window and down to the shore, and he listened. What does this seal have to say? And he heard what the seal said. And he went and did the seal's bidding. And he found the parcel in the barn, and he brought it in the house. Coming in the front door, which surprised his mother, Cathal, what are you doing up? And coming in from the front door. And he was carrying a package which he set down at her feet. And what's this? He didn't know either. And she began to unwrap the oilskin. Remember oilskin? Before plastic. And there, unwrapped, the gift of her skin, her pelt. She had thought of it so many times. She thought perhaps it would be eaten by moths or fall apart without use, as things do. But she found it soft and supple and gleaming, and she knew that someone had tended to it. Donald, her man. Well, she knew what she must do. So she said to her little one, go and wake your brother and sister, and we'll go down to the shore. I have a story to tell you. And so the three little ones and their mother went down. And she said she must leave, but she would always be near. She said she lived beneath the sea once, and that was part of who they were too. And they listened and they understood, and they didn't. But when they saw their mother pull on that skin and become a seal and dive into the waves, their eyes as big as teacups. And then they saw those eyes gleaming in the soft night light. Their mother's eyes, only their mother's eyes. And they knew, each of them, that all would be well. Well, Donald came home a few hours later, and he knew what had happened immediately when he walked in the door. And so life went on. The sun rose, cabbages grew. Donald always had the biggest catches of silver bright herring in his boat. And the villagers talk, even now, about the children who are always down by the cove singing with the seal.